Now today we're going to look at the science behind superhuman abilities. And some superhuman abilities like telekinesis, moving things with your mind, and pyrokinesis, setting things on fire with your mind, don't have a lot of scientific backing. But there are a few that I want to look into, and I found this subject interesting enough to actually do research for the first time for one of my videos. The idea of human beings being able to project energy from their bodies and the idea of humans being able to fly was first really made popular with a couple of things, which is Japanese animation and video games, most notably Dragon Ball Z and Street Fighter 2. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a show called Dragon Ball Z. And if you don't know about the show, this is how it works. The show is based around some alien humans, which are called Saiyans, which are kind of half monkeys. They evolved sort of differently than humans. And they were able to get stronger every time they were defeated in combat. And the more they trained in the martial arts, the stronger they became, and they were more able to harness their energy and use it to fight other people. And they also gained the ability to fly by extensive training. I guess they were able to project the energy downwards or just get past the boundaries of gravity by being able to lift so much weight. They were able to jump for extremely long periods of time, which is not so far from fiction. If we look at Tibetan monks, there are many stories of Tibetan monks being able to levitate. And not only Tibetan monks. While the Tibetan monks have been regularly noted to be able to levitate like 90 centimeters off the ground to reach a state of religious euphoria, there are accounts of European monks being able to levitate as well. In fact, there was a Saint Teresa in the Middle Ages who was seen by 230 Catholic priests levitating, and she did not even want to be able to fly. She was praying to God to relieve her of this grace that she would not be able to fly anymore, and eventually she lost the ability. And there was a guy, Joseph de Sa, who was the most famous flying man for a while. He was from southern Italy, and he was granted an audience with Pope Urban VIII, and he was seen flying, and they were kind of ashamed of it, so the Christians sent him to different monasteries and just kind of got him out of the way, and eventually he died. And then there was a guy in the 19th century, Daniel Douglas Hume, who was seen levitating by celebrities such as William Makepeace Thackeray, Mark Twain, and Napoleon III. Thousands of spectators, in fact. Researchers have hypothesized that the brain is able to create a biological gravitational field which you can then control with your brain to change directions and fly. So that's not so far from being impossible. Now, another ability that Tibetan monks were thought to have had was the ability to radiate heat from their bodies. They would sit in the snow, meditate, and they were able to create a ring of heat like in a 30-meter radius around them in a circle, perfect circle. And then you also have theories of spontaneous human combustion. And that's based on the fact that the human body can conduct a lot of electricity. In fact, we use electricity in synaptic responses in our brains all the time and our nerve endings. And biological heat, the human body can generate so many BTUs of heat energy from chemical reactions. There was a study where human beings were found to be able to, just from static electricity, generate 20,000 to 30,000 volts of electricity. If you had like really dry skin, you could get up to 30,000 volts of electricity. And in some cases, this energy was known to discharge into radiating blue and yellow flames, which for some reason didn't really cause any burns on the victims. It would just flash. It was like a flashing electrical response. But could this be caused by a parasite? A symbiotic relationship between human beings and something that lives inside of us. Human beings are host to a lot of parasites, from bacteria and viruses to tapeworms, roundworms. You have mites on your eyelids. You have lice, ticks that can be on the outside of your body. But there's one parasite that has been with us throughout our evolutionary history, which is the mitochondria. Now, mitochondria are very mysterious. They are found in your eukaryotic cells, which is like your animal cells. And plant cells have something similar, I think chloroplasts or something, that is like the mitochondria. But they're very weird. Human beings have DNA, of course, which distinguishes you from every other human being. It's what makes us up. It's their genetic code. Mitochondria have a different genetic code. They're almost like aliens that live inside of us. Now what they do, they're like power plants inside of your cells. Like, the more power that a cell needs, the more energy that it needs, the more mitochondria will multiply and create more of themselves and replicate. And it's theorized that they can generate thousands of volts of electricity. In the movie Star Wars, the Jedis were supposedly given the ability to use the Force by midichlorians, which were symbiotic organisms that lived in their bloodstream or in their cells. So it was based on mitochondria. Midichlorians, mitochondria. And there was a game called Parasite Eve back in the 90s. This was based around the fact that mitochondria are alien, that they have their own intelligence and they come alive and they want to free themselves and they want to be free of humans. And they did this by causing mutations. They were able to spontaneously combust. And it's very interesting because the name Parasite Eve, the Eve refers to Adam and Eve. And why this is so interesting is that mitochondria, you only inherit the DNA from the mother. The very first person, a female, that had mitochondria, we have that same DNA in our mitochondria in every person today. And you can trace it back because since you can only pass it on through the mother, if a woman has, say, no children and she dies without having any children, or she only has male children, then it doesn't progress any farther down that line. You have to go back to someone who actually has a daughter, and you have to keep going back through mothers that had daughters, and you'll eventually end up, they think it originated in Kenya or Tanzania or somewhere in Africa like that. So endosymbiotic theory believes that mitochondria originated from ancient bacteria that is now present in our cells, and we learn to adapt to it and use it for our own benefit. So bacteria, which is something bad, has been put into good use, which leads to another theory of mine that perhaps cancer cells, which seem bad now, could prove useful in the future. Since mitochondria have separate DNA and they're like separate organisms inside of us, and they're in all of our cells from our muscle cells to our brain cells, if they were able to communicate with each other and interact with our brain to interface with us, and we could use them as we use other parts of our body, what if cancer cells were somehow able to become fuel for these chemical reactions where we could create energy by burning off cancer cells? And cancer, if you don't know exactly what cancer is, let me show you a little diagram and explain to you what this is. On the left you see normal cells. They all have a similar shape and they all fit together perfectly. Then once you move on to like a radioactive event or some kind of carcinogen gets into your cells, the cell walls appear to take on weird shapes. And you have hyperplasia, and then you start reproducing more and more cells with you have an overproduction of cells where they can't even line up and function in the proper way. That leads to dysplasia and carcinoma. And eventually you have so many cells that are reproducing and they start flowing into your bloodstream, and that causes very serious illnesses. Now the reason it does this is because cells are supposed to deteriorate. There's a thing called programmed cell death. This process called apoptosis is when cells are supposed to die to form things. It's when a human embryo is first developed, you have a hand that looks like a fish hand. It has webs in between your fingers. The cells in between your fingers then are programmed to deteriorate and die so that you form functioning fingers. It makes structures that you're able to use. The other way that cells die is by necrosis, which is just basically cells become damaged, such as you burn your hand in a fire and the cells are no longer able to function. But sometimes this reaction doesn't work, and instead of the cells dying like they're supposed to, they start reproducing, and the cells are not functional, they're damaged, and they keep reproducing and reproducing, and then you have cancer. So they're basically garbage cells. So the only other way we could use them is to burn them off somehow and use them as fuel for something. There have also been cases where brain tumors have been able to stimulate areas of the brain, and there's so much that we still don't know about the brain and cancer cells and DNA. Who knows what is possible once we're able to accomplish that. So these anime like Dragon Ball Z that have energy projection and flying is not entirely based on fiction. In fact, a lot of the video games, such as Last Blade, has a character that's based on a Tibetan monk, and Dalsim, the character in Street Fighter II, is based on an Indian yogi. Samurai Showdown has a character that can spontaneously combust to create copies of himself. So maybe one day we will be able to project energy blasts, make our own Hadokens or Kamehameha waves. It's probably a long ways out, probably billions of years away, but maybe in the future it may become reality.